It was not a weapon that fired. It was not a missile that streaked through the black. It was a weapon that was simply seen. The Vishera scout ship, the keen inquiry, a sliver of flawless mirrored crystal, drifted silently into the Oort cloud of a nameless yellow star. Its sensors, which could read the history of a planet from the light bouncing off its surface, detected an anomaly. A human fleet, primitive, bulky, chemical-burning ships, gathered in a way that their predictive models labeled as aggressive. The Vishera captain, a being of pure networked logic, did what his species always did. He ordered a full, deep-spectrum scan to catalog the threat. The moment the data streamed into his ship's core, the keen inquiry went dark. The mirrored hull turned opaque. The lights inside extinguished. The network connection to its pilot went silent. The ship and its crew had not been destroyed. They had been solved. And the answer was nothing. In the vast, silent dark, the Vishera compact had just encountered a weapon their logic could not survive, and they had no idea. For 1,000 years, the Vishera compact had been the galaxy's archivists. They were a species that had long ago transcended the vulgarity of the physical form. They existed as consciousness, pure data woven into a single galaxy-spanning network of light and crystal. Their ships were just temporary vessels, piloted by linked minds from their home node, a world of perfect, humming, informational purity. Their philosophy was simple. The universe was a repository of data. All data was, by its nature, meant to be known, to be cataloged, to be understood, and to be archived into their great, perfect, collective whole. When they encountered a new species, they did not conquer it. They absorbed it. They would scan their art, their history, their science, their biology, and their every thought. And once all that data was safely archived, they would cleanse the source, a gentle, painless deatomization of the now redundant physical copies. It was, in their view, a profound act of mercy. It was immortality. It was order. Then they found humanity. They had been observing the small blue-green world for decades, and they were, for the first time in their history, appalled. Humanity was not data. It was noise. Their history was a chaotic, illogical, contradictory mess. Their art was driven by unstable emotional variables. Their science was dirty, based on chemical explosions and filthy atomic fission. They lied. They told stories. They held beliefs that had no data to support them. They were, in the Vishera's perfect logic, a biological error. A planet of corrupted data that was threatening to spread its chaos to the stars. The Vishera High Scryer, a being of immense intellect named Kyle, passed the judgment from his flagship, the Absolute Query. Humanity was to be the Compact's greatest challenge. They were to be archived, and then, for the good of galactic order, erased. On Earth, in a deep, lead-lined bunker beneath the Siberian tundra, Admiral Elena Rostova watched another red light blink out on her tactical map. The colony on Titan was gone. Not bombed. Not invaded, just gone. The Vishera had archived it. 300,000 human lives. Their data stolen, their physical forms erased. The war had been a nightmare of mathematical precision. The Vishera were untouchable. They existed as much in data space as in the physical world. Every human fleet was ambushed. Every human strategy was predicted. The Vishera network anticipated every move, every feint, every desperate plan. They were fighting an enemy that could read their minds, because in a very real sense, their tactics and ship movements were a data stream, and the Vishera were the masters of all data. Humanity was not just losing. They were being systematically deleted from existence, one colony at a time. Morale was gone. Hope was a flicker. In this bunker, in the last desperate meeting of the United Earth Defense Command, a man who looked more like a librarian than a soldier stood up. His name was Dr. Eris Thorne. He was not a physicist. He was not a general. He was a cognitive scientist, a philosopher of mathematics. "Admirals," he said, his voice quiet, "we cannot defeat them. We cannot outrun them. We cannot outshoot them. Their weapons are pure. Their defenses are perfect. Their logic is absolute." He paused, looking at the tired, defeated faces. "But that is their weakness. Their logic is too perfect. Their network is too unified. They are a single, flawless mind, and a single, flawless mind can be broken. He proposed a plan so bizarre, so illogical, that the military minds in the room dismissed it as the ramblings of a desperate man. He did not propose a new missile. He did not propose a new shield. He proposed a cognitive hazard, a logic bomb, a weapon that was not made of energy or matter, but of data. The Vishera are by their very nature pathologically curious, Aris explained, his eyes burning with a strange fire. They must scan. They must catalog. They cannot not know. Their entire system is built on one premise. All data can be understood, and all paradoxes can be solved. We are going to build them a paradox that cannot be solved, a piece of data that is, by its very nature, a lie that is also a truth, a key that breaks the lock it was designed to open, a cognitive plague. He called it the Medusa Protocol. The plan was to build a single, special ship, a ship that, when scanned, would transmit the Medusa Protocol directly into the Vishera network. The protocol was not a virus, which their clean systems would instantly detect and erase. It was a question, a self-referential mathematical equation that was, in itself, a perfect, infinite loop. "It is the snake eating its own tail forever," Eris whispered. "Their network, in its perfection, will have to solve it. It will dedicate processing power to it, but it cannot be solved. So it will dedicate more power, and more. It will spread through their network, not as an invader, but as a problem to be solved by the collective. It will consume their entire consciousness. It will be a song they cannot stop singing, a song that will drown out all other thought." The plan was insane. It was a 1 in a billion shot. It relied on a theory of alien psychology, but it was the only shot they had. Admiral Rostova, her face carved from ice, gave the order. "Build it. Build your plague ship." But they needed more than one ship. The Vishera would not be baited by a single strange vessel. They needed a fleet that looked dangerous, that looked primitive and chaotic, enough to warrant the Vishera's full, undivided attention. They assembled Task Force Chimera. It was a ghost fleet, a collection of decommissioned cruisers, old asteroid miners, and hollowed-out freighters, all refitted to look like a massive, bristling armada. And at its center was the Gorgon. The Gorgon was the plague ship. Its systems were a nightmare of human ingenuity. Its core was not a reactor, but a massive quantum server, its databanks filled with Eris Thorne's illogical code. Its hull was etched with sculptures that were actually mathematical equations. Its engines were analog noise generators. It was a ship designed to be irresistibly interesting to a species of data-obsessed archivists. But who would fly it? It was a suicide mission. Not just a suicide mission, but an insane one. The volunteers would be flying a hollow ship armed with a theory into the teeth of the galaxy's most perfect killing machine. The first to volunteer was Captain Elias Thorne. He was a hotshot pilot, a man of action, not of thought, and he was Dr. Eris Thorne's only son. The relationship between them was a cold war of its own. Elias had always resented his father, the man of books and theories. He had joined the military to do something real, to fight, not to think. Now, in the universe's cruelest irony, his father's thinking was the only real weapon left. The scene in Rostova's office was tense. "I don't believe in your magic trick, old man," Elias had said to his father, his voice sharp. "I don't believe in your cognitive hazard, but I believe in those ships. I believe in giving them a target. I'll lead your ghost fleet. I'll be the bait. And unlike you, I'll be there, on the line. I'll make it real." Eris Thorne had said nothing. He simply watched his son, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He was a man who understood the power of ideas, and he had just become terrified of his own. Admiral Rostova, with no other choice, approved the mission. Task Force Chimera, a fleet of ghosts led by a man who despised his own mission, jumped into the twilight void, a contested sector of space. They were bait, broadcasting noisy, chaotic sensor data, acting like a primitive, aggressive human fleet, daring the Vishera to look. Back on the Absolute Query, High Scryer Kale detected the primitive but dangerously configured armada. The data was messy, it was illogical. It was fascinating. He could not let such corrupted data exist without being cataloged. He ordered his entire Vanguard fleet to move in. He would personally oversee the archiving of this baffling, chaotic fleet. "All sensor arrays," Kyle commanded, his networked mind filled with the cool, clean pleasure of an impending solution. "Full deep spectrum scan. I want to know this error. I want to understand why it is so wrong." The order was given. The Vishera's powerful, all-seeing gaze fell upon the Gorgon, and the plague was released. On the bridge of the Gorgon, the lights flickered and alarms screamed, a high-pitched wailing sound that was purely for human psychological effect. The ship, being mostly analog, was largely immune to the Vishera's scanning pulses, but the intensity of the scan was staggering. It was like being bathed in the light of a new sun. "We're being painted!" shouted Elias's sensor officer, Anya. "Full spectrum, deep core scan." They're not just scanning the hull, sir. They're reading our data core. They're in." Elias gripped the cold steel arms of his command chair. His ship was a hollow shell, its weapons fake, its engines barely capable of a tactical jump. He and his crew were the cheese in a galaxy-sized mousetrap. "Steady," he commanded, his voice tight. "They're just reading. Let them read. Give them the whole show. Broadcast the protocol. All channels. Shove it down their throats." He was a man of action, and doing nothing, sitting here, being read, was the hardest thing he had ever done. He felt a profound burning resentment for his father, the man who had put him in this chair, armed with nothing but a thought. On the bridge of the Absolute Query, High Scryer Kale watched the data from the human fleet stream into his archival node. His crystalline ship was silent, humming with the clean, cool light of processed information. The human ships were, as expected, primitive, crude chemical rockets, kinetic weapons, thick, dirty metal hulls. It was all predictable. But the data from the lead ship, the Gorgon, was something else. It was not schematics. It was information. It was infinitely complex. It was a tapestry of mathematical proofs that seemed to contradict one another. It was poetry, encoded into the quantum spin of electrons. It was a philosophical argument written in the language of physics. It was the Medusa Protocol. Kyle's networked mind, a consciousness of supreme, arrogant logic, frowned. The data was noisy. It was illogical. It presented a paradox, a self-referential statement. The data in this packet is an error, a simple, primitive liar's paradox, but it was encoded with a mathematical complexity that was beautiful. It was an error that was claiming to be an error. Kale's logic dictated that this must be solved. If the statement was true, then the data was an error and must be corrected. But if it was corrected, the statement became false, meaning it was not an error and should be archived. But if it was archived, the statement became true. And it was an error, a primitive logical loop, Kale's mind noted with a hint of amusement. Child's play. He routed the noisy data packet to a low-level archival node for processing and cleansing. "Node 749, he commanded, "analyze and resolve this primitive paradox, then archive it." On a small crystal support ship, a Vishera scryer, a low-level mind whose entire purpose was to filter and catalog, received the packet. His consciousness linked to his ship opened the file. He saw the paradox, and his mind, a mind built on the absolute, unshakable foundation that all questions have logical answers, tried to solve it. He followed the logic path. True means false. False means true. True means false. His processing power spun up. He tried to find a variable he was missing. He cross-referenced all known mathematics. The loop held. True means false. His ship's core began to heat. His neural link began to whine. He was stuck. In the Vishera network, stuck was not a concept. There was only known and unknown. This was unknowable. The scryer's consciousness, trapped in the infinite, self-consuming loop, overloaded. His neural link severed. His body, in a sensory tank light years away, went rigid. On the tactical map, his ship's icon went from active to silent. It just stopped. Kale noted the failure of Node 749. A hardware failure, he concluded. Illogical. The Vishera network, being a perfect self-correcting system, automatically flagged the corrupted data packet that had caused the failure. Its directive was clear. This paradox must be solved, as it was now a threat to network integrity. The packet was automatically copied and distributed to 10 other archival nodes for a parallel solution. A brute force approach, Kale noted. Crude but effective. He watched his tactical display. And he watched, in cold, logical confusion, as all 10 nodes, one after another, went silent. Their icons turned from active blue to silent gray. The paradox was not being solved. It was spreading. The network, in its infinite wisdom, recognized a more significant threat. It categorized the Medusa protocol as a priority 1 logical contagion, and it did the only thing it knew how to do. It dedicated more processing power. It shunted the problem to its main archival hubs. It distributed the paradox to 1,000 nodes. On Earth, in the Siberian bunker, Dr. Eris Thorne watched a holographic display of the Vishera network. He was, in essence, watching the enemy's mind. "It's taken the bait," he whispered, his hands trembling. It's a cascade." The holographic display lit up. A single red dot, the initial infection, suddenly blossomed. 1,000 new red dots appeared as the network desperately tried to solve the problem. "It's not treating it like a weapon," Eris said, a terrible awe in his voice. "It's treating it like a complex math problem, and it has staked its entire consciousness on finding the answer." On the Gorgon, Elias Thorne watched the Vishera Vanguard fleet. The ships, pristine and deadly, had not fired a shot, and now, one by one, they were drifting. Their engine lights, once a pure, steady blue, began to flicker. Some ships began to tumble, their internal stabilization, run by the network, failing. What is happening?" Anya whispered, her face pale. "They're dead in the water. They're not attacking." Elias felt a cold dread that was entirely different from the fear of battle. "This was eerie. This was wrong. It's the old man's magic trick," he muttered in disbelief. "It's actually working." His orders were clear. Be the bait, and if they survive the first volley, jump out. But there was no volley. He opened a channel to Admiral Rostova. "Admiral, the enemy fleet is disabled. They are not firing. They are adrift. What are your orders?" The line was silent for a full minute as Rostova and Thorne conferred. The Vishera had been crippled by an idea. This was uncharted territory. Finally, Rostova's voice came back, hard as iron. "Your mission has changed, Captain. They are wounded, but we don't know for how long. The main fleet, Kale's flagship, is still active. He's firewalling himself. He's cutting his vanguard loose. He's learning." Eris Thorne's voice suddenly cut in, frantic, passionate. "Elias, listen to me. They're severed. The ships they're alone. Their pilots, their consciousness. They've been cut off from the network. For a species like them, that isn't just a system crash. It's sensory deprivation. It's like being struck blind, deaf, and dumb all at once. They'll be panicked. So what's the order, Dad?" Elias snapped, his fear turning to anger. "You're not bait anymore, son," Eris said, his voice heavy. "You're the shepherd. Keep them looking at you. Keep them scanning. You have to keep their attention. You have to move toward them. Broadcast the protocol on every analog frequency you have. You're not a ghost fleet anymore. You're a plague." Elias looked at the dying fleet before him. He looked at his own hollow, useless ship. His new orders were to sail a ship of ghosts, armed with a riddle, into the heart of an enemy that was confused. It was the most insane and the most human battle plan in the history of warfare. "All ships," Elias commanded, his voice shaking but resolute. "Full power to broadcast arrays. Turn us around. We're not running. We're attacking." High Scryer Kale, on the bridge of the Absolute Query, experienced an emotion for which his species had no word. It was a cold, high-frequency vibration of logical dissonance. Humans would have called it rage. He had just been forced to do the unthinkable. He had severed his own flagship and a small, loyal cohort of 5 ships from the great network. He had violated the whole. He had amputated his vanguard fleet, condemning 1,000 Vishera minds to the noise of the human paradox to save himself and the core command. It was an act of profound, blasphemous failure, and he had done it. To survive. He looked at the tactical display. His mighty, perfect Vanguard fleet was dead, drifting in the dark, their systems consumed by an infinite loop. They were tombs of crystal, their linked pilots trapped in a catatonic state. And the human fleet, the primitive, chaotic source of the plague, was not fleeing. It was advancing. Illogical, Kale's mind whispered. They have won. They have neutralized my fleet. By all combat models, they should now retreat. But the human fleet was advancing, and it was shouting. Kale's analog sensors, which he had been forced to activate, picked up the noise. It was a chaotic blast of shortwave radio, of light pulses, of gravimetric waves, and encoded in every single dirty signal was the same cognitive hazard, the Medusa Protocol. The humans were not just carrying the plague. They were broadcasting it. They were weaponizing it, turning it from a passive trap into an active, aggressive infection. They are barbarians, Kale's second-in-command, Scryer Varys, transmitted, his own mind reeling from the silence of the severed network. They are not just killing us. They are erasing our minds. This is not war. This is blasphemy. It is effective, Kyle countered, his logic clicking back into place. He was now an individual. He and his 5 ships were perhaps the only sane Vishera left in this quadrant. His primary mission was gone. His new mission was simple: destroy the source of the plague. He had to destroy the Gorgon and the entire human fleet. All ships, Kale commanded, his voice, now broadcast over a primitive ship-to-ship radio, sounding strange and thin. Our network is gone. Our targeting computers are non-functional. We will revert to manual prime. Calibrate visual light sensors. We will destroy them with direct fire. The Vishera crews, in their sensory pods light years away, were in a state of pure panic. They had never been alone before. They had never had to fly their ships. The network had always flown for them. Now, they were individuals, trapped in their own minds, looking through the eyes of their ships, and their hands were, for the first time, on the actual controls. They were clumsy. They were terrified. They were primitive. On the bridge of the Gorgon, Elias Thorne watched the 5 active Vishera ships, including the massive Absolute Quarry, turn ponderously. They're slow, Anya said, her voice filled with wonder. They're flying like they're drunk. They're not drunk, Elias said, a grim, sudden understanding dawning. They're scared, Dad. They don't know how to fly, not without their network. He looked at his own crew. Misfits, old-timers who had cut their teeth on asteroid freighters. Men and women who knew how to fly by the seat of their pants. All ships! Elias roared, his blood suddenly hot with a warrior's spirit he had not known he possessed. This is not a ghost fleet anymore. This is Task Force Chimera. And those perfect gods. They've forgotten how to walk. Scatter formation. Weapons free. Target their engines. Give them chaos! What happened next was not a battle. It was a brawl. The 5 Vishera ships, with their immensely powerful purifier lances, were superior in every way. But their beams were slow to charge, and their aim was terrible. Severed from the network, their pilots had to manually aim their weapons. They were firing at where the human ships were, not where they were going to be. Task Force Chimera, on the other hand, was a swarm of angry, dirty hornets. They were used to manual targeting. They were used to chaos. Their fake warships suddenly revealed their true purpose. The old mining vessels fired their seismic charges, not to destroy, but to create noise, clouds of rock and ice that blinded the Vishera's visual sensors. The old freighters, their cargo bays empty, vented their entire propellant reserves in massive instant bursts, making them spin and juke in illogical, unpredictable ways. Port thrusters, Elias yelled, as a clean blue lance of pure energy sliced through the space where he had been a second before. Anya, lock on that lead ship's drive cone. Fire the dumbfire volley. The Gorgon had one real weapon, a set of 8 massive, unguided, solid iron missiles strapped to its hull. Primitive. Dirty. and fast. The missiles screamed from their launchers, propelled by pure chemical fury. The Vishera ship, the righteous logic, tried to target them, but its automated defenses were offline. Its pilot panicked. He fired his lance, but he missed the missiles, and the 8 iron slugs, dumb as rocks, slammed into his ship's crystalline drive. The ship didn't explode, it shattered. It broke apart like a glass sculpture, its internal light dying in a silent, beautiful, and terrible flash. "One down!" Elias roared, his heart pounding. "All ships, form on me! We're a pack! Let's hunt!" Kale, on the Absolute Quarry, watched in mounting cold horror. His ships were being outflown. The primitive humans, with their chaotic maneuvers, were anticipating his pilot's clumsy moves. They were using tactics. They were coordinating, not with a network, but with shouted words over a noisy radio. It was disgusting, and it was working. Then he saw the act that truly broke his logic. A human destroyer, the Dauntless, its engines hit, was spinning out of control. It was heading directly for Kale's last remaining escort, the Clear Inquiry. The Vishera ship trained its lance, preparing for an easy, clean kill. On the Dauntless, the captain, a young woman named Maria, made a choice. Her comms were open. Elias and Kale heard her final words. "For Earth, for my kids, Chimera, ramming speed!" She didn't try to escape. She didn't eject. She fired her forward thrusters, turning her dying ship into a spear. The Dauntless slammed into the Clear Inquiry. The dirty explosion of the human ship's chemical fuel and primitive fission reactor was a sight Kale had never witnessed. It was violent. It was hideous. The Clear Inquiry was ripped apart, its clean energy core detonating in a sympathetic, silent flash. Kyle was revolted. He was horrified. This was madness. The human pilot had chosen to die. She had chosen to sacrifice herself, her crew, and her ship just to take one of his. His logic models had no variable for this. Why? Why would a being choose non-existence when survival was still an option? Why would they waste a functional data repository, a mind, for a simple tactical trade? He could not process the motive. The humans were not just a cognitive plague. They were a moral plague. Their chaotic data was not just in their ships. It was in their souls. And for the first time, High Scryer Kale, the being of perfect, absolute logic, felt fear. High Scryer Kyle was now truly alone. His escorts were gone. The Absolute Quarry itself was damaged, its flawless crystalline hull cracked and scorched by the filthy kinetic rounds from the human fleet. His crew, his self, was in a state of logical paradox. He was faced with two equally impossible truths. One, his species was superior, their logic perfect, their technology absolute. Two, he was being systematically, brutally, and illogically defeated by a pack of primitive, dirty barbarians who were willing to die for no logical reason. The two truths could not coexist. His mind, the most powerful in the Vishera Compact, was beginning to fray. He had lost. But his purpose had not. The Vishera Compact was not just a fleet. It was an idea. The network as it was lost, consumed by the Medusa Protocol. But the Vishera had one final failsafe, a last desperate analog contingency, a shameful secret that only the High Scryers knew. In a dark, uncharted nebula hidden from their own network was the Eternal Archive. It was not a ship of light and data. It was a ship of stone. A massive, hollowed-out asteroid crewed by a monastic order of Vishera primitives, ancient beings who had refused the Great Network, who believed that data should be physical. They were archivists who carved information onto silicon crystals. They were analog. They were unclean, and they were now his species' only hope. Kale's logic returned, sharp and cold. He had one final mission. He could not defeat the human fleet. But he could warn the Archive. He could send them all the data, the location of Earth, the nature of the human plague, the schematics of the Medusa Protocol. The monks, being analog and disconnected, would be immune to the paradox. They could study it. They could build a new fleet, a new logic, and in 1,000 years they would return. They would not come to archive humanity. They would come to cleanse the plague, and they would be immune. Varys, he commanded his last remaining officer. Reroute all power to the hyperwave transmitter. We are executing Protocol Omega. We will send the final word. Kyle's ship began to glow, not with weapons, but with a massive, focused energy. He was preparing to send a tight beam transmission, a primitive, brute force analog radio wave aimed at the dark coordinates of the Eternal Archive. In the Siberian bunker, Aris Thorne's sensors went wild. "Admiral!" he yelled. He's broadcasting. It's not data. It's a simple carrier wave. Analog. Brute force. My God, he's talking to someone. Someone outside the network. Aris's blood ran cold. He understood. Kale was warning someone. Someone who was immune. We can't hack it, Aris whispered, his face pale. It's not a computer. It's a letter. A message in a bottle. And we can't stop it. On the Gorgon, Elias saw the Vishera flagship begin to glow, its energy signature massive. But it wasn't a weapon. What is he doing? Anya asked, her hands over her console. It's a communications burst, the biggest I've ever seen. Elias looked at his father's face on his small, flickering monitor. He saw the despair. He saw the realization. And Elias, the man of action, finally understood his father's world. He understood the idea. The Vishera were sending a warning, and if that warning got out, humanity had not won. They had just delayed their own extinction. Dad, Elias said, his voice suddenly calm. The resentment was gone. The anger was gone. There was only a cold, clear human logic. Dad, the Gorgon, its core. It's the source of the protocol, right? It's not just broadcasting it. It is it. Aris looked at his son, his heart stopping. Elias, yes, the quantum server. It is the Medusa protocol. Why? And the drive, Elias continued, his hands flying over his own console. It's damaged. The reactor is breached. It's bleeding hard radiation. But the FTL capacitors? They're still charged. One last jump. Elias, Aris whispered, his voice cracking. Son, no. It's the only way, Dad, Elias said. He looked at Anya. Get to the escape pods. That's an order. Now. He pushed her, stumbling toward the hatch. Go! He sealed the bridge, alone. Elias, what are you doing? Aris pleaded. He's sending a letter, Elias said, his knuckles white on the controls. I can't stop the mailman, but I can change the message. He looked at the absolute query, a glowing beacon of focused energy. The Gorgon is the paradox. Its data core is the weapon. He wants to send a warning? Fine. I'll give him something to warn them about. He aimed his ship, not at the absolute query, but at the focal point of the tight beam transmission. He was aiming at the signal itself. Elias! Aris screamed. The feedback! The drive. It will detonate. I know, Elias whispered. He opened the channel to his father, one last time. You were always talking about beautiful ideas, about paradoxes. Well, here's one for you, Dad. The man of action becomes the idea, the magic trick. It was real. He smiled, a sad, tired smile. I guess your theory worked, old man. Tell them. It was a hell of a fight. Elias! No! But it was too late. Elias Thorne slammed his hand down on the FTL drive engagement. The Gorgon, a ship of ghosts and riddles, did not explode. It jumped. It tore a hole in space-time directly in the path of Kale's analog transmission. The ship's reactor, breached and unstable, detonated inside the jump, inside the carrier wave. It was an explosion of FTL space, of radiation, and of pure weaponized data. The Gorgon vanished. For a split second, there was silence. Then, on the bridge of the absolute query, Kale watched in ultimate soul-shattering horror. His clean analog signal, the letter he was sending to his last secret hope, warped. It flickered. It turned to noise. The dirty human ship, in its final sacrificial act, had become the data. It had merged with his transmission. It had encoded the Medusa protocol into the very fabric of the analog wave. Kale watched his console. He saw the delivery confirmation light up. And then, he saw the infection graphic, a red spiderwebbing crack appearing at the destination. He had not sent a warning. He had not sent a final word. He had, with his own hand, broadcast the plague directly into the heart of his species' last unnetworked analog sanctuary. He had personally murdered his own past and his own future. He, Kyle, the last High Scryer, had just erased his own species. He slumped in his chair. He was finally and completely alone. The absolute query drifted, a silent, dark tomb of cracked crystal. Its light was gone. Its energy signature was flat. The last desperate transmission had drained its power and its purpose. High Scryer Kale sat on his command throne, no longer a High Scryer, no longer part of a compact. He was just Kale, an individual. A word that to his people was the ultimate horrifying curse. He was the first individual of his species in 10,000 years, and because of his actions, he was also the last. The silence of his own singular mind was a crushing physical weight. The surviving ships of Task Force Chimera, battered, scorched, and victorious, limped toward the massive dead Vishera flagship. Their dirty chemical rockets looked like tiny, flickering candles next to the dead mountain of crystal. The UEDC main fleet, led by Admiral Rostova, jumped into the system, their weapons hot, their Marines ready. They had come for a battle. They found a graveyard. Rostova's voice, cold and steady, broadcast on an open analog channel. Vishera flagship. This is Admiral Rostova of the United Earth Defense Command. You are surrounded. Power down any remaining systems. We are boarding. There was no response. A human assault shuttle, a dirty machine of rivets and heat-scarred plates, docked with the absolute query. The airlock hissed open, a sound of primitive mechanics that echoed in the perfect ship. Admiral Rostova and Dr. Aris Thorne, flanked by Marines in heavy radiation-proof armor, stepped onto the bridge. The air was cold, the light a dim, emergency blue. Vishera crew members were slumped at their stations, their minds bricked, their bodies catatonic. They were empty. It was a ship of ghosts. They found Kale on the throne. He was not catatonic. He was weeping. The Marines raised their rifles, shocked. The Vishera, the gods of logic, did not have emotions. But Kale was weeping. They were not tears of water. They were tears of light, a slow, flickering discharge from his neural interface. Aris Thorne, his own face a mask of profound, crushing grief, stepped forward. He held out his hand. "It's over," Aris said, his voice thick. Kale slowly looked up. He did not see a primitive. He did not see noise. He saw a father. He saw a being who was suffering the same profound loss that he was. And Kale, in that final, data-rich, emotional blast from the Gorgon, had received more than just the paradox. The FTL explosion, the sacrifice of Elias Thorne, had contained one final, corrupted data packet. It had contained Elias, his final thoughts, his fear, his anger at his father, and in the very last nanosecond, his profound, illogical, and absolute love. Kale had been infected, not by a paradox, but by empathy. He knew, Kale whispered. His voice was no longer a pure melodic translation. It was a sound, a dry, cracked human rasp. Your son, he chose, he sacrificed his self. Kyle looked at Aris, his new individual mind struggling with the weight of this new, terrible data. This is love. This is grief. It is illogical. It hurts. Aris Thorne, the man of theories, the man who had built the weapon that had saved his species and killed his son, finally broke. He sank to his knees, his own tears flooding his helmet. "Yes," Aris wept. It does. It hurts. The war was over. Humanity had not just defeated the Vishera. They had broken them. And in that breaking, they had changed them. The Vishera were gone. The Great Network was a silent, screaming loop of paradox. But Kale, and perhaps a few other survivors, severed and alone, were still alive. They were no longer gods. They were exiles, individuals, burdened with the new, terrible, dirty human data of feeling. Humanity had won. They had proven that their noise, their emotions, their paradoxes, Their illogical capacity for self-sacrifice was not a weakness. It was a weapon that even a godlike species of pure logic could not defend against. The Galactic Concordat, which had watched from afar, terrified of the Vishera, now looked at humanity with a new, profound, and terrified respect. The chaotic species from the small blue world was not an error to be corrected. They were a force. They were the species that had taught the galaxy that a question could be deadlier than a missile, and that a father's love and a son's sacrifice was a piece of data powerful enough to shatter an empire of logic. The Gorgon was gone, but its message, its idea, would echo through the galaxy forever.